Great to see you all. Thank you so much for coming. My name's Juliet. I'm hosting the discussion today. Don't have too much to say myself because we've got some great guests and speakers, so I want to allow them the sort of space and time. A lot of you I'm recognising from previous events that we already had in this series, which is great. Breakfast with Arup, very simple concept of find a topic that a lot of people want to talk about and sort of gather together in a room and have a conversation. When we decided at the beginning of the year to talk about climate resilience, we realised it's a very big topic. We wouldn't be able to do it justice if we were just having one event, so that's why we've decided to run a series. There was a couple of things we were thinking about in there to have the space to sort of dig into particular aspects of climate resilience and what we need to do, but also always to keep that conversation cross-sector, cross-discipline, not to create a silo where we were only looking at resilience from the water sector or from the property sector, because I think we've all recognised we need to widen that conversation to really achieve resilience. First event, we talked about the challenges and barriers and also the opportunities. We had some great examples and stories from our panellists there. And the second event, we moved on to practical examples. But one of the things we heard through both of those events was the importance of governance, organisational change and leadership. So we've decided in this session today to take a bit of a step back to talk about that. I think in Arup, we love to develop and deliver the technical solutions for resilience, but we know that they're not going to work if the governance is not there. They're not even really going to get procured or implemented if the leadership isn't there. So leadership is a much bigger topic than just resilience, but I think it's nice to sort of step back, look at it from a different view and try and sort of explore how that's going to help us achieve the resilience outcomes we want, move from reacting when our roads are underwater, yet again, what do we do, to actually making proactive decisions, looking to the future, sort of building in the measures and solutions that we need to make the difference. So I'm delighted to start by welcoming Victoria Hurth. Just to sort of explain the format of today's session, we've got Dr. Victoria Hurth. I'll let her start speaking any minute now. She's going to do a sort of 15, 20 minutes, almost a keynote. So stretch our minds a bit, present some of her very sort of advanced and valuable expertise and experience in this space, and then we'll move to a panel session, hear from our panellists, much more in the conversation. I really hope that a lot of you in the room will have questions, comments, observations then. So Victoria will introduce herself. She's an independent Pracademic. She's an expert in purpose-driven organisations, leadership and governance. We haven't given Victoria much time, so I'll stop with the introduction now and allow Victoria to get started. Hi there, over to you.
Thank you. And I can't see anyone, but I understand there's lots of you, and you so many you can't find seats. So this is a great start. I don't have much time, and already this is going to be now I can see you. Hi. Good to be with you virtually. I don't have much time, and this is going to be a bit of a whirlwind, even if I had much longer. So put your seatbelts on, so to speak. There is a lot of material, however, for you to delve into later on. So just see this as a sort of, big picture jump-off point. And what I really want to do, just as Juliet framed so beautifully there, is to give you really the ability and the tools to see the bigger landscape, which I know, and I know from experience, when I do that, you'll be like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. I can see that. But sometimes it's not easy to get beyond that fog, especially if we're operating in the day-to-day. So the only bit in the universe that I'm maybe useful for is that I've spent maybe 3 decades trying to kind of understand and get through that fog so that I can kind of leapfrog leaders like you to shortcut change. So without further ado, I can see it's I'm trying to keep my eye on the clock there to what minute past the hour do I need to stop, Juliet, just to give a...
Coming to the mic. We started a few minutes late, so I think stop by 25.
Right.
25.
Yeah,
Is
will
that
do.
okay? Latest? That would be great. Thanks, Victoria.
Super, super. I will speak quite fast, but hopefully clearly. But we can. I'll stay online as well if there are other questions after the panel discussion you want to bring up. So, purpose is our key tool. These are the sort of takeaways. Key tool to align organisations with a sustainable future and make an economy that works, especially in the timeframes, even without these timeframes. But now, I think we just have to really go beyond where we are and see that. But to make that real, and to avoid purpose washing, we've got to be really clear what purpose is, and we've got to be really clear what governance behaviours will achieve it, and we've got to make them happen. If it's not about governance, as I'll say, it's a nice idea, but if it isn't embedded in governance systems, it ain't going to be changing decision making, and we're going to be creating and retaining barriers to action. And then finally, that we've come a long way in this process. The word purpose, I'm sure you all see and have seen progress and get bigger. And then there's like anti because of purpose washing. But we're now at a cusp point, and I'm going to mention very briefly at the end the international standard in purpose-driven organisations that has just kicked off a 2-year process of which everyone is invited globally to come and co-create. And this really could be the framework that could help us understand what good really looks like. Because if we don't know what that looks like, we cannot judge how far away from it we are, and we'll all be washing. It's the reality. So, big picture overview. I'm going to skirt very briefly over this, but to say, and the rest of the presentation will break it down more, is that we exist in an unsustainable market economy. It is the market economy that is driving the issues we have, and we have to recognise that and call it out. And there is a very specific reason why the market economy isn't working. It's because of a series of assumptions, but the most important central assumption that we have in it is that financial income is a good proxy for well-being outcomes. And therefore, that's what we count. So at the macro level, it's a GDP economy. We focus on GDP as a marker of success. In organisations, we focus on financial self-interest, particularly profit-driven, and that's not just business. At a micro level, financially driven work and lives. The new emerging sustainable market economy, and if you look for it, you can see it everywhere, and you can see it at all these levels. The issue we have is that this energy is not yet united, and we don't have a common language, and that's one of the things that I'm trying to help us to resolve. So we can see moves to a well-being economy, also known as things like a purpose economy, a regenerative economy, a mission-led economy. There are lots of terms, but ultimately this is what we mean. Purpose-driven organisations at the meso level, that makes real the economy. The economy is just an idea. It needs to be operationalised. Does that through organisations, including government, which is an organisation. And that then in turn enables and unlocks human energy for meaningful work and lives. And you create virtuous cycles. So that's what it looks like. And I'll be going into some of the detail of that and why the ISO helps clarify and build directed action. And when people turn around and say, oh, well, that's not feasible or pragmatic, or, well, I'll go into the sort of the logic that of which we build that idea of feasible. But where will we be if we don't do this? Because there are freedom, efficiency and democracy effects of the market economy that we need now more than ever. We need those to solve the problems we have. Think what happened in the pandemic, and the likelihood is as the chaos rains down, and we know what's in the system, and that's why we talk about resilience, the chances are that we'll move to command and control, centrally planned economy, because it'll all be too difficult, and we'll say, can someone else make the decisions? So this is a really critical moment for humanity, for life on Earth, and we are the people who have the privilege and capacity to do something about it. So some base concepts. The economy is about allocating resources available to society in a way that maximizes social well-being. No matter what terms or ways around it you look, if you look at the beginning of any economic textbook, essentially it's saying that. It might talk about welfare instead. Well, it's the same thing. So what is well-being then? Really, this is just an umbrella term to capture what we mean by what we value most in terms of, in other words, flourishing, a good life or whatever. And we can capture that in a working definition. positive state of being where current and future needs are met such that there is the capacity and opportunity to flourish. Now let's remind ourselves of the definition of sustainable development and sustainability. Development, in other words, progress, that meets the needs, in other words, well-being, if we look at that definition of well-being, of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. What that means, and it took about 20 years for the penny to drop to me to really see this, but so this is what I mean by the fog, is that what these are all saying is that our shared, you might say, meta purpose of humanity, and it shows up everywhere when you look, is long-term well-being for all. These are the true three aspects of sustainability, also the goal of the economy. And if you ask enough whys as a shared ethic, I can almost guarantee you will get there. So well-being, yes, what is it? Ultimate philosophical question, never an answer, but it should be the question in the centre of the room and what we strategize for and accountable for, not just for some, for everyone. Any shared ethic will be, and not just now, but into the future. Otherwise, it's a complete nonsense. And if we're in any doubt that our governments, we as citizens delegate to governments to govern on our behalf, and they in turn, for them, the economy is a tool in order to achieve their remit. And their remit, as the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board notes, is around delivering well-being as the primary function of governments. And in the UK, for example, local authorities are actually incorporated. They're companies, they have directors, and their powers, and unlimited powers to take away barriers and other laws that are in the way, are all around delivering well-being. So if the goal of the economy is to deliver long-term well-being for all, in other words, sustainability, so we wouldn't need a word called sustainability if the economy had been doing its job, why are we under such an existential threat? So I'm not going to do any of the presentation part where I go into the big picture of all of the multifaceted layers of collapse, of which climate is just one, because we don't have time, but it needs to be obviously in the room for all the decisions we make. And this is where we need to be thinking about decision making. So I'm not going to talk about ISO 37000. I led that process with my co-convener across 5 years, 77 countries, 25 liaisons, and it was signed off by 164 countries. It tells us what good governance is for any organisation, no matter where you are in the world. Before that, we didn't have a consolidated consensus view, and the views we did have were anchored to the very unsustainable market economy, which is driving the issues. So this matters because we can now talk authoritatively about what we mean by governance. So the definition in that, which we can distill, is that governance of organisations is a human-based system by which an organisation is directed, overseen and held accountable for achieving its defined purpose. So let's just focus in on those three key functions of governance. Direction, which is then overseen. Are we achieving our direction? Let's just keep checking, make sure. And accountability. Are we accountable to significant others for whether or not we have achieved that direction? So oversight and accountability, utterly critical, but hinge on direction. So what is direction? And this is where we get to the very heart of decision making, because any impact in the world we have, from the biggest to the smallest, is a consequence of a decision that is made. So this we can also think about micro decisions like getting up in the morning and saying, what do I want to do? Versus a whole organization, why do we exist? And that is that every decision has an optimizing goal. So what am I trying to achieve? Like what is the thing we're trying to optimize for here? But any decision will be made within parameters. These are boundaries or guardrails or whatever to say, well, I want to achieve that objective, but within these parameters, these decision-making parameters. That could be things like, I want to obey the law. It could be values, which they're just a nice poster unless they are translated into specific decision-making parameters. It could be risk tolerance. It could be how much climate you're going to emit this year. Those are all parameters. And why that really matters is because while we talk a lot about strategy, strategy is merely how do I achieve a goal within a parameter. So if we're not really super clear on what our optimizing objective and our parameters are, then what is strategy? I mean, and how is it going to be effective? And if you're in an organization of a group of people making decisions together, are we all pulling in completely the opposite direction? And this is where a lot of bad management and governance and organization happens. When we're talking about aligning with a sustainable future, we cannot afford to be sloppy in that way. So getting this really, really matters. It also helps us to really understand why we are in the mess that we're in. And I'm going to talk now for the next 6 minutes about 3 logics, which you can use to diagnose your situation and your organization, your stakeholders, who you're interdependent on their governance systems, and understand what's happening at the macro and meso and micro levels. So a lot to do in 6 minutes, but I'll have a go. This is an adapted daily triangle. What it does, the key insight is that our current system, economic system, we could call business as usual or logic 1. It's based on a whole series of assumptions that morally justify the fact that we say to organizations, business very specifically, but all organizations are sucked into this vortex, that the most important thing you can do is act in your own self-interest and your financial self-interest. And that so that becomes the optimizing goal, and the parameters. The most important parameter that you need to count and measure and make sure is in good health are the stocks and flows of financial capital. Think about annual reporting. Think about the whole accounting sector. So what that means is that the strategy in the business case, the innovation, is trapped within this governance frame. That means, of course, that the ultimate objective of long-term well-being for all is out of sight and actually off limits. This is a deliberate design of the system, that companies acting in their own self-interest should not care about well-being. They should just meet preferences that are revealed in the market. What this also means is in the preferencing stocks and flows of financial capital, we ignore the stocks and flows of natural, human and social capital, hence the dawn of multi-capital accounting. Again, I'm not going to go into that. Stakeholder health and the health of social and environmental systems. These are, if you want to count them, maybe, but certainly are not regulated. And this, of course, is the ESG agenda that is now trying to correct this course. What has happened since we started to understand the breakdown of the issues at the bottom of the triangle, all of those factors? We are moving into, or the response, including after the financial crisis, is, look, everything's fine with the business as usual set of assumptions about how the market just automatically produces well-being. We just focus on our self-interest. All of that's fine. The problem is we've become very short-term. We're sort of hyper short-term in how we've enacted that. And there's nothing about business as usual economics that says that you should be short-term. So now we need to be thinking about long-term self-interest. So the optimizing goal is still your financial self-interest, but in the long term. And in doing that, you broaden your scope of decision making because your parameters start to encompass the health of everything that you rely on if you want to make money in anything but the short term. And there are layers of enlightenment. So we can call this enlightened self-interest, enlightened self-value. And there are levels, as you can imagine. Most are enlightened a little bit, maybe on a good day, about climate, and are building in some hard science-based thresholds around net zero. But if you take any of the other maybe 12 major planetary boundaries, social flaws and other issues, unlikely a little bit. And again, this is what ESG agenda is scrambling to do something about, but doing it from trying to battle the logic of the middle of the box while essentially trying to bring on a new logic in a bit of an opaque way. And that means, however, though, you can start to make different business cases. When you're in logic 1 and the issues of unsustainability hit you, the only thing you can do is you can only act if you have a business case that says, this protects our short-term self-interest. So you end up with CSR, a smorgasbord of placating stakeholders because you can create a business case. When you move to logic 2, you have a bigger base of a business case. Well, we need to retain that capital to invest in the health of our stakeholders and. And if you have all of the issues on the table, you can start to innovate for multiple issues all at once, which is absolutely what we need to do. But the ultimate objective of long-term well-being for all is still off limits, and that curtails massively a range of things, including most importantly, our innovative capacity to think about what is the problem at the centre of the room, because everything is filtered through financial self-interest in terms of the business case. And this is where we move to purpose, because a purpose essentially what changes the objective of the organisation, which in effect becomes a paradigm shift because it bypasses the set of assumptions about how the market best works. And it says the end goal of the economy, long-term well-being for all, should be an anchor for our reason to exist. Now, we can't do everything, which is why the definition in the British Standard is that an organisational purpose is an optimal strategic contribution to long-term well-being for all, knowing that in the marketplace of well-being, lots of other companies are dealing with other strategic contributions, but together you're working towards the meta purpose of long-term well-being for all. That has the effect not of making profits and finance not important, it's important for every organisation, but stopping it to be an objective, an optimising innovation objective, and instead firmly a means to an end, which, let's face it, money always is. It is a symbolic good. It can never be a terminal end thing anyway. It has lots of other effects, not time to go. But what that means is then the strategy becomes exploded out, which is why we see innovation in purpose-driven organizations take on a whole different level, because you're not bound by the same cognitive pathways or the same business pro forma. But anyway, I'm finishing there just to say this has actually moving forward a lot faster than perhaps some of you may realize. So I would say don't give up on purpose, because just, the darkest days of hours before the dawn, we have a British standard that was almost 2 years ago created by a group of experts in view to the fact that this could become global, and they were very much global actors. I talked about, the definition of purpose, but also the fact that purpose unleashes humanity back into the organisation, because our primary driver is to do good for others, because it gives our life meaning and purpose and makes us feel like we don't want to just commit suicide because our lives are completely worthwhile. It's a fundamental driver, and we've taken it out of business because Logic 1 forces us to do that. And then we have the ISO, which has kicked off 2 years ago, and 2 years. It will be for 2 years. It kicked off last week. I'm project leading that process. And it's really the destination that all of these other fantastic initiatives are like on-ramps to. So we also start to clear up the different roles that different actors play. So calls to action, please download and read PAS 808, the British Standard. You can join the implementers group online. If you look up PAS 808, but you have to put a space, so it's PAS-808. I should change that. Please, this is from a different presentation. There is no leaflet, but I can send you the 2-pager. Actually, if you join this LinkedIn group, if you just search ISO 3711, you will find the group which has how to get involved, and the 2-pager involves focusing on your national member body or becoming a liaison if you're eligible. And then we are trying to write all this up into a book to try to get global reach rather than me just presenting all the time. And so please do join our group. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria. I might do a quick. Thank you very much. So much for us to think about there. Thank you, Victoria. You covered a lot of ground. We're going to test everyone now on everything that you told them, and maybe set a bit of homework and an essay. But I think if I can invite the panel to come up and join. We're not going to do a question to Victoria now, just to sort of keep things moving. I think my own many reflections listening to that, but I think in the context of climate resilience, long-term well-being for all is what we're delivering, but we often come up against these barriers and blockers about the business case. If you're looking at this from a global perspective, the business case is clear because we're enhancing the resilience of society, of community, of nature. But by the time we're at a project level, looking at the sort of engineering or the technical type solutions, thanks, Danny, we do hit some blockers. So I think thinking about some of this context, the direction, the accountability, the parameters that we're working within, there's so much there that can help. As I say, we'll send some links. We'll send a link to the leaflet. There's a lot that we can reflect on, but I think I will move directly to the panel. So I'm going to allow the panel to introduce themselves. when I'm doing these kind of things, there's nothing worse than sitting there while someone reads out and you're like, oh, I wish I hadn't written it quite like that. So I'll let you introduce yourselves. Would love to hear any reflections that you have on what you've heard, or a sort of scene setting context about your organisations and where you are on that journey. So I'm going to start with my dear colleague Will to introduce yourself and reflect.
Thanks, Juliet. I'm Will McBain, and that's what I used to look like. And that is what I now look like. So I'm a director at Arup, based up in Yorkshire, and I lead our work in flood resilience and climate change adaptation, mainly for on the flooding side, but I'm also working on some drought-related projects because I'm originally a hydrologist. And I'll probably be talking a little bit about our work with the Environment Agency. I'm delighted that Natalie from Jacobs is here. We do a lot of work with Jacobs on the Environment Agency frameworks. So I'll talk a little bit about how we're tackling climate resilience in a purpose-driven way and the kind of behaviours we're trying to instill across the supply chain and within our own organisations.
Thank you so much, Will. Lucy?
Hello. If I start with UKGBC, maybe for anyone who's not familiar with us, we're a membership-based organisation working to sort of radically improve the sustainability of the built environment. I've been at UKGBC for 4.5 years now. Originally started developing, leading our work on innovation, and I've done various other things over my time there, but in the past few years I've really started to deep dive into topics of regenerative leadership and systems change, which wound up with me taking on a slightly new role, heading up our sort of systems change and organisational change work earlier this year. And when you start to get into sort of that systems thinking piece, that's where you really start to see the value of this organisational change, behaviour change work, because you're starting to get into the nitty-gritty sort of deep reasons behind why we all act and behave in the way that we do. And that all really fundamentally actually sits behind UKGBC's own sort of theory of change and our strategy. I think we're pretty well known for all of the work we do that's on the kind of technical guidance and frameworks and tools that we go and co-create with industry. But we also do a lot of work, as you were kind of talking about earlier, around that piece of, well, how do you go and actually enable those things in the real world? So we're talking about sort of organisational purpose, the structural governance issues, and all of that. And that comes out really explicitly through some of our work, particularly around sort of sustainability leadership, some of the programs we run, but it's also really embedded into our wider programmatic work. So very relevant to today, we're currently working on developing a resilience roadmap for the built environment, sort of co-created with industry, including Arup. And this is really looking at how do we define and measure resilience in the built environment and what are the action pathways for different stakeholders. But it's a really systems thinking bit of work, because it's not just looking at what are those technical metrics and indicators and what do we need to do physically, tangibly on buildings. It's also really getting into those cultural, organisational shift, mindset shift aspects as well that we're going to need in order to make those things sort of real and achievable on the ground.
Thank you so much, Lucy. There's a lot we can dig into there. Danny.
Thanks. Danny Hall, my role at the Crown Estate is Head of Engineering Operations, and that covers quite a lot of ground. I was really fascinated by Victoria's presentation, really great stuff around purpose. We kind of sit in that kind of innovation and foundation piece mostly, where we kind of look after the assets, and we kind of talk about our own purpose in the engineering team is to own the performance of our assets. And where most people think that's carbon, and largely it is carbon, it's more than just carbon. It's about sustaining that project, sustaining that asset, giving it more life, giving the customers a better experience in that asset. We own the assets for hundreds of years. We rarely sell them. So we've got that stewardship of our assets. Interestingly, to take it back to the sort of Crown Estate level, it's a very purpose-driven organisation, relatively recently, I would say. But our purpose is, generally speaking, we say to develop lasting prosperity for the nation, which is a great sentiment and one that we use almost every day to judge and measure what we do. And that's quite a big statement in terms of prosperity. It's not just money. It's around developing better communities, looking after the rural estate better, looking after the marine estate better. And that purpose at the Crown is starting to really get gravity across the Crown Estate. Everyone really believes in that purpose. So it's a great that we're aligned with some of the stuff that Victoria said.
Thanks, Danny. That's great to hear. And I think we can look at that a bit more in terms of the ability of the Crown Estate to look at things in the long term. I think that's something we sometimes struggle with. I think something else in the context of resilience is how we can shift our behaviour from worrying about the last thing that happened, the roads being underwater last week, and actually looking at the long-term view, looking at multi-hazards. It was not that long ago when every time you heard the word resilience, it was about pandemics, and we seem to be not talking about that at all anymore. It's a very good example of that kind of rear view mirror and very reactive thing. Fun fact about Danny is that I found out the other week, I think we both joined Arup at the same time as graduates, and it's a very hazy time for me. So
it's a lot more fun facts about me, actually. But,
yeah, we both agreed we're much more sensible now. So I might come back, Danny. I think so looking particularly at climate resilience, I think, as I've said, it's to some extent, it's a no-brainer. It will deliver long-term outcomes. It will cost us money if we're not resilient. It will deliver value to the communities who depend on whether it's infrastructure or property, sort of anything in the built environment. But we do, and I'd love to hear from the audience about this as well, we do still, I think, struggle with that shift to long-term thinking. There's so much we need to do in the next year. There's things that, extreme weather events that have just happened that we need to react to. And is there anything that you can say from the Crown Estate, sort of where you are on the journey, how you can bring in that long-term thinking and maybe make the right decision today that's going to, set us on the correct pathway for positive outcomes by 2050, 2070?
Yeah, well, I mean, we had a conversation earlier on about cultural shift, and I think that's the thing that we've done well at the Crown over the last. The Crown has always been a purposeful business, but Dan Labatt came in as our new chief exec, and I think it's really important to have somebody at the head of an organisation that kind of believes in this stuff. We're all kind of led by our leaders, and to drive cultural change through an organisation as complex as the Crown Estate, you're going to need a good, strong leader to kind of drive that agenda. And that lasting prosperity for the nation statement, which we do use on a daily basis, has really driven that cultural change. I think it's difficult because there's so much complication around this sort of stuff, and that drive for profit is embedded in everything we do, industry-wide, probably more than just our industry, of course. We're trying to kind of change the game and say, you're not going to be, when you do an appraisal on a development project, back in the day it was just, does it make the number? Does it give you the 10%, the 15%, whatever that number needs to be? And now we're kind of saying it's not just that number. There's got to be a number. It's got to be profitable. That's part of the prosperity. But it also needs to think about the sustainability goals that we have. It also needs to think about this kind of thriving community that we talk about. Some of the stuff that we're doing on our wider estate, which is kind of redevelopment master planning, which is something that we haven't really done before. One of the bigger goals of that is to get a thriving community, to create a kind of society that's kind of starting to think about well-being and wellness, not just money and profit. So some of the and so that kind of agenda, I suppose, is a pretty rough word for it, I think, but that kind of belief that the culture of a business can change and be kind of a little bit relaxed and actually start thinking about things that we actually personally probably take very seriously. Whilst at work, then you put that to the side and you think about money again. Just to be able to kind of relax the workforce to say, you bring it to the table. What is important to you, because you're part of this kind of potential thriving community. So I think that culture shift is difficult, but you've got to embed that early, and I think you've got to embed that at the top.
And just very quick follow up on that, because I'm interested. And are you seeing that you can get both? You can get the long term outcomes for community and profit.
Yes, I think very much so. Yes, and I think we can probably see that getting better in the future, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
I think ultimately everybody will be thinking along the same lines. I think being a relatively forward-thinking business.
Yeah.
I think it's a difficult balance.
Yeah.
But ultimately, part of that prosperity, a relatively big part of that prosperity, is being able to give our profits back to the treasury at the end of the year.
Thanks, Danny. Lucy, be interesting to hear, so perspectives from UKGBC and your members. Where are organisations in the built environment sort of on this journey? I think, as Danny said, I think the Crown Estate does have that remit to look in the long term and make good decisions that, you know, achieve both financial prosperity and long-term outcomes. When you've been talking and engaging with your members around change and systems thinking, are you starting to see that shift in thinking? Is that coming through?
Yes, and I think that's when it particularly comes down, though, to really looking at that individual purpose as well as just organisational purpose. The kind of core of change management is really digging into kind of the human factors that enable change. So we do a lot of work working with members on that sort of individual behaviour and how do you define your own purpose as a person, be that at work or in your own sort of personal life, and how does that connect into the way that the organisation has developed and is implementing its own purpose. And I think some of the sort of big bits of success work that we see are organisations that really involve their staff in the development of their sort of strategies and purpose as well. And even just from our perspective, we're going through a sort of process where we're redoing UKGBC's strategy and sort of looking at how that links to our mission and everything at the moment. And we're, as staff members, very involved in that process. And I think that's what you really start to see some of those changes happen.
That's important. And I think, again, for us, we're the same. This matters for us in Arup as well as it matters for the client and, you know, partners and organisations we work with. Will, a question for you. I think if you were to think about one of your favourite projects that you know has sort of technically enhanced flood resilience, can you think of an example or a sort of story where behaviour change has been part of the way that the you know, positive outcomes have been delivered?
Definitely. First of all, I just wanted to say how delighted I was to hear Victoria Hurth give that talk, because I saw that about 4 years ago at the Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership, presented by someone else, and it made much more sense actually when Victoria presented it. But I get it.
I thought you were going to say the other way around.
What I love about working with the Environment Agency is, you know, that their strapline is create a better place, and our strapline is shape a better world. So ultimately, the work we do with them is about enabling environments in which people and nature can thrive. You know, the clues in the title, Environment Agency. So they are genuinely, as an organisation, full of people who are passionate about nature, but also they're coming round to the realisation that it's about people as well. And they don't build physical assets, they do, but it's not just about the physical assets, it's about the whole system, as you were talking about, Lucy, this sort of systemic understanding of how these systems work to build resilience. So we're doing some fabulous projects with the Environment Agency, thinking very long term. So as you know, you're leading our work on the FENS 2100 plus strategy and adaptation pathway. This is looking to 2120 as to how we might adapt the whole of the FENS area to deal with climate change. We're looking at the Humber, we're looking at the Severn, we're looking at the whole of the Don catchment in Yorkshire. And in the sort of discovery phase of those adaptation pathway pilots that we're doing, the big thing that emerged from that is that it's all very well an organisation, a government agency coming up with a big strategy. It will only work if you've got local buy-in. So this adaptation pathway wheel, which you may be familiar with or should find out about because it's great stuff, works at a catchment level, it works, but ultimately the only way you will embed it is if you take that wheel down to a local scale and work with not just local authorities but also through process of participatory democracy. And we're actually using citizens' juries on these projects to get local people involved. Because as far as I'm concerned, this stuff about resilience and purpose-driven organisations and the well-being economy is all about seeing the opportunity. Because a low-carbon world with a nature-positive world would be fantastic. You know, the pollution levels would be down, nature would be thriving, we would have locally produced food, and we would have supply chains that were probably more local. So in designing environment agency infrastructure, we're trying to use locally sourced materials and local labour forces and get local people involved, not just with helping to co-design the infrastructure, but also potentially maintain aspects of it. And that's really inspiring and exciting. And I think people genuinely working on the framework and within the environmental entity get this. The problem we have is that there's a huge amount of process and standards and which can unlock innovation, but can also tie people in knots and make it quite hard work, probably harder work than it should be. But that's our mission, to unlock it all and create some fantastic places, and we are doing it. And the Avenue, First Avenue, which won an award last week, is a small scheme in Birmingham where we've worked with the community, we've driven carbon out of it massively, and we've won a sustainability award because it's such a great local scheme that protects people from flooding, but creates a really good open space and some nature.
And when you put it like that, it does sound, as I say, sounds like common sense and the thing we should all be doing. I think thanks, Will, for sort of setting the scene in that. A quick reflection from myself on the system change for resilience outcomes, the need to join up from a very sort of local micro scale to a system scale. And I think there's something in communications and how we do articulate some of these complexities. You would have, I mean, I'm simplifying a bit, but an individual standing in their own area or their own field saying, well, I just need to dredge, or I just need to keep pumping here, and to sort of help in a simple way articulate that decision has impacts on the broader system. So again, I think for Danny, because you're looking at real estate, I guess that tends to be individual assets. How do you look at sort of across the system and how your assets will function as part of an interconnected system, and how does that come into decision making?
Well, I think the structure around reviewing is across the whole of Crown Estate. It's not just asset by asset or marine project or rural project. So we're always governed by the same kind of core values. So that's quite important. And some of the, from the engineering side, we largely do real estate, but actually we're still thinking about greening, and we're still pushing agendas that maybe aren't necessarily pure engineering projects anymore. But if we're setting the scene for a building in terms of a sort of technical scene for a building, we'll start to talk about greening on roofs and greening walls and that sort of thing. But I think it's important that that umbrella is always there that says, you've got to be doing the same things as everybody else and everyone's moving in the same way.
Yeah.
I think it is difficult to see it as a kind of at an enterprise level. I think it's a huge ambition with a hugely complicated challenge, and it's quite nice to kind of say, well, let's split it into chunks.
Yeah.
We've got the umbrella. It's always the same people reviewing. It's all the same core values that are reviewing. But your chunk needs to do that. And then we've got ownership of that kind of chunk, if you like. But we know who's got ownership of the marine chunk.
Yeah.
So I think it's an enormous challenge. But I think if there's consistency in the way we're reviewed against our objectives, I think that's
okay. And that makes sense. So you have the bigger picture, but you can still create it. But probably exactly as Victoria was saying, you've got the parameters for the particular decisions that you're making. It's something that I'd be interested in your views on, Lucy, because we've framed this whole series in the context of climate resilience and resilience outcomes. I knew, and almost inevitably, when you start talking about the behavioural change, the organisational change of systems, it moves into a broader space of sustainability and sustainable outcomes. I'm just wondering if you've got any reflections on, is there anything different? Are there any sort of behaviour changes that you think are most specific to resilience, or do we just adopt the kind of purpose-driven organisation and resilience will drop out of the other side?
Yeah, it's a funny one. I kind of quite often say similarly when we're talking about organisational change, that in some ways it's quite agnostic to sector and sort of location, because a lot of the factors you're looking at are kind of similar. But there are definitely some things around resilience that I think might be more kind of important, or maybe just urgent, maybe to look at around it. Two sort of immediate ones come to mind. I think the first one is about sort of regionality and location, because even if we're looking at the UK, relatively small, but you've got huge variation in the sort of vulnerabilities and the risks just over the UK, and huge variation in people over the UK. So we're all really impacted by our local, policies, our social environments, culture, everything. So when it comes to implementing sort of change management around resilience, you can't just apply that one-size-fits-all approach at all. It has to be really sort of place-based from an asset sort of perspective, but also like people-centric as well, really focusing in on what the needs of people in that location are and what really taps into, I guess, their psyche around the issues. And then the other thing, again, I guess on that kind of the human psyche element of it is time and the timeframes which you see the benefits of implementing some resilience measures, because as we all know from the horrible weather of the last few weeks, like we're seeing these problems, particularly in the UK, things like flooding now, but we're also getting pretty hot, and people are really feeling these impacts at the moment. And the great thing with resilience and adaptation measures is we can implement them now and see the benefit now really tangibly. So I guess in theory, if you're doing it right, you can maybe make change around resilience much quicker and more easily than you might be able to do around things like some of the net zero things, which have less tangible, longer term thinking benefits for individual people. So yeah, potentially a bit more of an opportunity to tap into people's sort of mindsets and what really gets them interested in the issues around this.
Thanks, that makes sense. And that just made me reflect for anyone who was here at the last session that we had on this. I think it was Carl from Lend-Lease. He actually had a slightly different view, which was because net zero is mandated, it just happens in his organisation, whereas because the climate resilience outcomes are voluntary, it's hard to actually get that change, get them implemented, I guess, when you're at the sort of procurement stage of a project. It's, you know, different to that sort of mandate coming down. So I think hoping the audience is getting ready with questions, and we'll come around with mics in a minute. I think I'm just going to direct one question to Will while you all think of your own questions, which is, we've talked, I think a lot of this makes sense about the sort of multi-stakeholder, different scale, systemic approach. But one of the things I often encounter in my work is who's leading this, who's responsible? And I think sometimes you end up in this circular position of, well, if government isn't telling us to do it, we won't do it. But if the private sector isn't doing it, the government can't quite see the change. And I'm just wondering if you've got an example of who made a decision to sort of make a change, how you might have formed that collective view.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of leadership, I'm really coming to the conclusion that it's about citizen empowerment, and we should be getting citizens in the driving seat on a lot of this. But a really good example of work we're doing with the Environment Agency around change is this decarbonisation technology accelerator, and that was really the brainchild of a single individual. You know, this isn't come from the board of the agency down. It's you know, Andy Guffog's a mate of mine. He works at the Environment Agency. He's a carbon specialist, and he came up with this idea of accelerating decarbonisation technology. And I helped him pull together a business case for this, which we secured about 21 million, which we're now using to embed 37 different low carbon technologies into the capital programme. And that's about we've got 6 different hub teams geographically and 6 different themes, and they're all developing communities of practice and talking to each other across the regions and across the technologies to embed it into the programme. It's slightly chaotic at the moment. We've got it all set up and we're getting underway, and the communities of practice are settling down, but we do have a structured framework, and it's all come out of Andy's head originally, and then we've helped him to pull it together into a business case and a concept and an execution plan. So it's hugely exciting, and I think the leadership have all crowded in now, and I'm sure they'll be taking credit for it. But
and embrace the chaos, Will. I think that's.
But they won't. I mean, the leadership of the would forgive me for would forgive me for giving credit where credit's due. And Andy would say, well, it wasn't me, it was my team, and it's a team effort. But I have a huge amount of respect for that man, and it's a great piece of work. And
shout out to Andy, everyone.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. There's roles for everyone in this, and as I say, you can often get hung up on somebody needs to tell me to do this, and you know, there's different roles at all levels in an organisation. So hoping people have got questions. This is the bit where we've got no idea what's coming. It's always fun, and I'd love to hear any questions, reflections on what you heard, observations from your own organisations. Try and make it into a bit of a broader conversation. And when you've got the mic, if you can just introduce yourself and where you're from.
Yeah, hi. Well, thanks very much to the panel. It's been a really stimulating conversation this morning. My name's Nigel Tonks. I'm a director at I was interested in some of the challenges that you were, I think, hinting at, Danny. You know, some of the dealing with the systemic complexity, trying to work outside the footprint of your assets, if you like, dealing with things at an enterprise level. And Will, you talked about the participatory democracy and bringing the community into this. I was interested also in some of the governance things, Lucy, that you've been talking about, and Victoria's model there of changing the paradigm. I'm interested in hearing about the role of partnerships amongst entities outside yourselves. How do you bring partnerships together in a way that can collaborate and take this kind of systemic approach and a wider approach to collaborative solutions to try and draw more capability and insight into this? Have you got any experience of how partnerships influence?
It's a great question, thanks Nigel. And I think, you know, there's the SDG of Partnerships for Action. I think in principle we can all get that. I've got a lot of experience myself from the fens on that. You know, we need a partnership to do this differently, but actually having a partnership that makes decisions. Any reflections from all of you? Maybe start with Danny. You know, the other stakeholders in the areas that you work in, how you collaborate with them. Thank you, Nigel.
It's a pretty tough question, Nigel.
Well done, Nigel. We like a tough question.
I think interesting in terms of investment partners. We don't really have many investment partners. We generally have quirk of the way the Crown Estate's governed. We can't sort of borrow money under the Act that we are governed by, but we can partner with people to build buildings, to build assets.
Deliver, yeah.
So that's one, and that's an interesting bit. We've got two great partners, one Regent Street, one St James's, and they're great partnerships. But actually finding the right people who are on the journey with you and believe in the journey with you is actually quite challenging. We think we're relatively forward-facing in this kind of purposeful journey that we're on. Other businesses just aren't there, and if they're still very much bottom line, and that would be a challenge for us to form partnerships with them sort of people. And I think that's kind of one bit. I think where we do like partnerships, where we've grown from partnerships, is kind of partnering with just businesses like your own, Nigel. The kind of intellect we get from people like Arabs, other big partners, some of the kind of kind of McKinsey type companies, if you like. There's intellect that we need to adopt in there. There's knowledge that we need to adopt, and that's where we do get really good value. But again, finding them companies with the same beliefs, the right level of intellect, the right level of resource, is still quite a challenge. But I think that's where we kind of are very successful in terms of allowing ourselves to grow.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a really good point. And everything that Victoria presented, once we're recognising that actually we need a partnership, you've got 3 or 4 organisations all at different places on that journey, all with their own sort of mission and vision. Lucy, any reflections from you on partnerships within the building councils and elsewhere? And I'm looking around for others to be putting their hands up as well. And
a couple of ones. I think maybe sort of slightly answering the question, but less formal partnerships maybe, and sort of very quick reflection on sort of the community of practices that sort of you mentioned, and Victoria sort of alluded to them as well around the new standards that are coming out. But that's a really important sort of part of sort of collaboration and sort of forming partnerships, because we're all testing and trying these things at the moment. People haven't really done them before. So if you can find those communities that are bringing everyone doing it together to learn from each other's like great successes, but also their failures and where they haven't done it quite right, that's really important. And I guess from our perspective, a bit of a plug, I guess, for our broader systems change work in this point, because UKGBC, we're really a sort of convener of industry. We are that middle person that brings together lots of other different organisations to collaborate and form those partnerships, even if they're informal ones. And what we've learned through sort of a systems change programme where we brought together quite literally anybody from the built environment who wanted to get involved in it, got involved last year. And through that, we explored loads of sort of deep intervention points for the built environment of how you might create sort of systemic change. And what we're doing at the moment is working to take some of those learnings, and we're bringing them together with one of our sort of senior executive leadership programs, who are also wanting to go, well, how do we take those learnings and really apply them tangibly on a built environment project? And again, it's bringing together these really diverse sets of voices that can kind of, I guess, challenge each other and nudge each other in the right direction, because even if you've got the highest sort of ambitions in the world, you want to be regenerative, nature positive, whatever, we're all still stuck within this system.
Yeah.
So it can get quite easy to get dragged down by
Yeah.
it. So having people sort of challenge you in a constructive way, I think, is really important.
Brilliant.
Part of that.
Thank you. Thanks, Lucy. I think someone's got the mic already. We've got a couple more. Certainly got time for probably 2 more questions at least. After
Great.
this.
Hi, Kate Sandel from Newcore Capital. And to premise this question, I used to work for B Corp for 6.5 years before I sound too negative. I loved Victoria's presentation. Obviously, I'm big into purpose. I left because I challenged the economic system, and so hearing about citizen assemblies, which are amazing, bringing people in, bringing things back to localisation. Is it possible in the economic system that we live in to thrive with those kind of like localised supply chains, everything like that, and still have profit maximisation as being the sole driver of economic markets? Can we do it? And I know that's probably too much of a question, but like,
Right.
I think setting the tone of having Victoria speak at the beginning of this, and then that narrative, I think, is really important to recognise the limitations of what we're working within. Donut economics, or everything that kind of comes with that. Is it? Yeah. From your experience, can it be scaled?
Will's jumping to answer. Go ahead, Will.
This is the question on my mind. I mean, this is, and there's so many conversations going on about this at the moment. And there are those people sort of like, have you come across Rebiz and Erin Remblance talking about, well, of course, profit maximisation is destroying the world, and there's no way that conventional corporate world can be compatible with sustainable development. That's one end of the spectrum, and then you've got Victoria probably coming up with an answer which is a little less radical, and then there are the sort of not business as usual with ESG and CSR, and I think that is the fundamental question we've got to answer. Is it possible to make a profit? And I think that if you're doing something that's worthwhile, that's got purpose, that's taking you in the direction of a low-carbon economy that is in harmony with nature, then why shouldn't you make a return on that? But I think we've got to think about what we do, and our economic activities have to shift to being entirely regenerative, not degenerative. And if you're doing something that is regenerative, that is actually building natural capital, it's building social capital, it's building intellectual and community capital and resilience, then why shouldn't you make a profit from doing that? Because ultimately, you've got to make a living. And I think to the Erin Remblance, who I really like Erin, I sort of follow her on LinkedIn, and it's very sort of inspiring because I think she came from L'Oreal and sort of realised, put that world behind her and moved into a more purposeful place. But I think Victoria said it all for me when she said, well, if we don't find purpose-driven organisations within a market economy, we will come back to a command economy. And I think that, the road to serfdom and all that thinking around what went so badly wrong with the socialism as it was interpreted.
Right, we're getting very big now.
We are getting very big picture.
I think Kate had
I think these are the conversations we need to have.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think there's just something about recognising where we are, what's missing in the current system.
I could talk all day about that, I'm sorry.
I know, that's so sorry to sort of cut you off, but we were, moving to...
But I think it's also, sorry, just quickly on that, being clear that, I don't want to be too negative either, but I fundamentally, personal opinion, don't believe that we can, net zero is even a fallacy in the current world we're living in, the system we're living in. But what we're talking about here isn't that profit can't exist. Being purpose-driven doesn't mean you're also not generating profit. I work for a non-profit. We are still fundamentally needing to create profit to do the purposeful work we're doing. It's just a shift in the ultimate thing that you're heading towards.
Right, I think we've got, so there's quite a few, I might not be able to take everyone's questions now because I don't want us to go, we can carry on over coffee. So there was Anne, lady here, lady in the striped jumper, and probably, unless anyone's got a amazing, punchy, short question.
Mine's
at
quite
the
short
end.
and actually very good follow-up. So I'm Anne from Arup, and I also don't want to sound negative, which is terrible to start.
When everyone introduces their question with that, there's a but.
But I think it sort of answers it as well as asking the question. So we have a lot of clients and ourselves who aren't defined as purpose-driven, and of course have to make money. I mean, that's, it is unsustainable not to make money and to be a business. That's the thing. So I think the question for me is, how do we help our clients prove the value when they're not purpose-driven? How do they, when money's still their bottom line, how do we prove that there's a value in this? And you guys are talking about long-term things. These might be clients that are turning buildings over or doing something else. This is the answer, isn't it? It's proving the value of it.
Proving the value. I think that's really... I'm going to take the liberty of answering that question myself, just quickly, and to put it in the context of resilience. I think there's something that we don't do well enough and we need to do well, which is to articulate how much it will cost if they don't do anything. At the moment, resilience to a lot of clients still feels like a capital cost now, because we haven't necessarily got the real numbers to say this is what you're looking at over the next 10 years, 30 years. So presenting that counterfactual at a very sort of micro scale, not a global scale. Where did the mic go to? The lady here, thanks.
My question actually kind of piggybacks very well off of Anne's. My name is Antia. I'm with Oxford Properties, one of TCE's partners. So glad to hear that. I think my question was really around when we make the case for ESG within a company, kind of from the business as usual sense, it's very much built in this is value protective or value. We're trying to create value, which is, to your point around the business case, what if the numbers aren't there yet? And how do we talk about, at the leadership level, I guess, morality? And at a certain point, is something right or wrong? And, I think Jamie Dimon just came out basically defending JP Morgan's approach to I&D and saying, this is morally right, we're good at it, this is what we're doing. And, I'm wondering if you guys have examples of, not always leaning back on the business case, because what if it doesn't exist? What if we have to push back on some decisions, within our asset management allocation around, maybe it's not going to maximize the profit, but we need to get comfortable with the fact that maybe we can still generate profit. It's just not going to be to the nth degree.
Anyone, Danny, do you want to?
Well, I think it's a really good point. I don't want to sound positive.
Go ahead. Please do sound positive. That would be fine.
Yeah, we're going through it on one of our projects right now, one of our bigger projects, and the business case that we have, it works really well financially, but doesn't give the carbon numbers that we want, doesn't give the kind of thriving community experience that we want, etc., etc. So we're doubling back and saying, and it's about that phrase, maximising profits. It's maximising profits within a different scope, I think. So we might reduce the profit by doing something better. And I think that to take a kind of leadership role in that sort of more moral approach to development and business, I think is great. But you're not going to get as much money, but you'll get a better product. And if you the kind of simple look at this is the kind of Mies risk that we're all under, where we've not looked after the buildings properly, and the kind of legislations had to step in saying you can't let the building out unless it's EPC B by X date. We just let ourselves down there really, and so we've been put under pressure. If we don't do it ourselves, somebody will enforce it. So we might as well do it to our scope, not somebody else's scope.
Excellent, thank you. So, lady, have you got the mic, or did the mic go somewhere? So the lady in the grey jacket on the end has been waiting. Your hand's been up for a while. So I think this question, Samir, then I think if that's all right with everyone, we'll close and carry on over a coffee and a pastry.
I'm not sure if we've got time for this question, actually.
Why is that?
Priyanka's in my team, so this is going to be...
Oh, okay.
Hi, I'm Priyanka at the Crown Estate. I had a question about getting other people involved when they're not on board. We're all here because we want to be here, we want to enforce this positive change, but are your organisations doing anything to convert the unconverted, so to speak?
That's a really good question. Will or Lucy? You're both
Probably
Lucy's
coming on
nodding,
that.
so go
yeah,
ahead.
I'll come back in sort of talking about our sort of leadership programs, some of the sort of bespoke work we work one-on-one with members. Because, I mean, normally we are still coming at it from working with organisations who are on board, but that does not mean every single person within that organisation is on board, right? And so the organisation will tend to put forward a mix of people who have different amounts of sustainability knowledge, different interests, different amount of care they have for it. And this is where you get to see some really interesting sort of transformations happen at that personal level. So we're talking to like quite senior sort of execs across the business who come in really wanting to get nitty-gritty technical content about how they deliver sustainability, how they talk about it. And we do a bit of that, but we really blend it with that work on defining individual purpose. How does it align with organizational purpose? And like some of those things, I don't really like using it as a term, but people recognize it, the kind of soft skills sides of leadership. And you always get, from some people, a little bit of initial pushback, hesitancy around doing that, because it can make people feel a bit uncomfortable, particularly in sort of built environment world. But that's where you see the biggest changes as well. And after you spend sort of a few days over a series of months of working with people on this, you get really big shifts in mindsets from that kind of almost like blame culture of it's this within the organization's not working, it's this person or this role that's not letting me enable change, to actually going like, what's my agency? How can I be more empowered to actually go and advocate with this change within my leadership position? So I think it's just always having that sort of the mindset bit and individual leadership bit in mind.
Brilliant.
I have got a fantastic example, actually.
Is it punchy?
It's very punchy. Well,
Okay,
I found out yesterday that we've won the funding. So Leeds University and Arup and the Environment Agency and the JBA Trust have put in an application to the Royal Academy of Engineering for a project where we're getting kids involved with understanding catchment management and flood resilience. And there's an outdoor education centre in Bradford, in Ilkley, where I live. And they have something like 3,000 students through every year. And we're going to build a scale physical model for them to play around with water, to understand how water... So it's in the middle of an ancient oak forest, this centre, near Ilkley, 3,000 kids coming out from Bradford, walking around the forest, then going back to this centre and learning about hydraulics and flood management and hydrology. And I think that's how we need to get people into the whole sustainability agenda. Nature connection, for me, is what it's all about.
Great example. Thank you, Will. Okay, Samir, one final short and sharp.
Lovely. Thank you, everybody. Sama Bagi, and I guess the best way to describe it is a part-time academic working in resilience, part-time consultant, and part-time politician. So the people question is an interesting one. We were at an event earlier in the week with Resilience First, and the Lord Mayor cited a statistic which stuck with me, and he said 47% of Londoners don't believe they have experienced climate change. And actually, you know, in the 6 months where we've had the Surface Flooding Review and the London Climate Resilience Review, I just find it amazing that actually looking at London as a whole, that is the sort of statistic you get. So kind of building on the first question, it's how do we get over that? You know, what is it that we need to do that we're not doing already? Thank you.
It's an awesome question, and I'm not sure I've got an answer. So if anybody does, I would love to hear it, and then we'll...
It feels like not a punchy question.
Not a punchy question.
No, but it is a really interesting area because in the global north we are so well buffered. And I think, and in the global south, they clearly aren't. They're experiencing it firsthand almost every day. So, you know, they might not made the link between olive oil prices and the flooding in northern Greece. But at the moment, that is pretty much, you know, you might be unlucky enough to get flooded. We're so remote from it. We're so well buffered. And I think the way that this will become apparent to us in the UK is when international commodity prices start being massively affected and we have supply chain disruption related to food. And you know, and remember the Bangkok flooding and microchips are affected. And it brings it home to people then because it affects their day-to-day lives. And when they can't get to their Xbox because the chips aren't coming, you know, that'll, I think, crikey. And they might wake up.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Danny.
Something about priorities as well. I think, you know, if you're, you know, we're all pretty well off actually, you know, but there's lots of people who aren't well off, particularly in London. And if you're kind of looking after your 3 children, scraping enough money to feed your children and pay your rent, you know, net zero carbon just sounds like an expense that they're not interested in. And I think that, you know, like there's been, you know, this kind of capitalist system that we talked about earlier has kind of put people in a kind of in a moment where they're kind of prioritising quite extremely, I think. So I think the whole system has put us in that position.
I think there's some really good answers, and I think my own reflection from this is however hard I try and stop the conversation getting bigger, the conversation does always get bigger because it matters, and I think it's great to have this kind of forum where we're expanding a bit, thinking about it. And I guess the one I'd love for you all to have a takeaway, if anyone's got, wants to sort of speak to me and Louise, say what a takeaway is, or contact us by email. But I think for me, it's sometimes when things feel difficult, just to sort of do this zooming out and say, why is that? What's the shift that we're not seeing? And that very often that shift is much more governance, organisation, behavioural than what maybe a lot of us here spend our day-to-day work doing in the technical solution. So I think that's really good to sort of have a bit of time and space to think about that. Thank you so much for your interesting questions. There is coffee and drinks still, Louise, so we've got this area for at least another 15 minutes. And thank you again, and thanks to the panel.